Do you know it was interesting that Miss California came out and she was favoured to win the contest. And she had to ask one of the judges to ask a question. So she asked this bloke a question. He was openly gay. And he said this. He said in, I think it was Cleveland, he said they've just passed a law to make same-sex marriage legal. Do you think this should happen in every state in America? And this young lady said, you know what? I'm so glad that we live in a country like America. Because in this country, you can choose whether you want to have same-sex marriage or whether you want to be married as a male and female. As for me, I believe it's the right thing and the God-given thing for a man to marry a woman. That judge went straight out of the contest, got onto his blog, and he calls himself the Queen of the Media, and he promptly put in big headlines that this young lady was a dumb bitch. And he said, had she won the contest, he would have rushed up onto the stage and personally ripped the tiara off her head. See, you've got to understand me here. This is not even an issue of homosexuality. This is an issue of a postmodern world that says, you know what, this is not about tolerance, it's about compromise. I want to ask this guy the question, why did you ask the question in the first place? Because he ended the question by saying why or why not. He wasn't interested in why or why not. He didn't want to know why or why not. Because now we're living in a culture where nobody is allowed to express that viewpoint lest it offends these modern day sensitivities of a culture that will all have to go with the flow without speaking up what they really believe. Folks, that blows a lot of me. And it stinks. It's on the nose. They want me to give up this notion that what I believe might be true. And I think one of the tragedies is that in the last 30 years there's been this moral backlash against the church because of the judgmental attitudes we've often had against people who have been divorced, or the judgmental attitudes we've had towards homosexuals. The manner in which we've gone about expressing ourselves has often been so critical and judgmental and hurtful that now we're completely dismissed as if we cannot speak up about it. You know, it's a good thing because when I preached this message a few weeks ago, the message landed into the hands of somebody and they wrote to me a letter. And it was pretty interesting. They quoted about 20 of my statements and then they proceeded to dismantle them. Man, I love that. Now, I wouldn't mind if every message I preached, somebody wanted to have a go at me. I'd rather that than we all sit there falling asleep and doing nothing. In fact, I don't know if you remember, some of you are older. One day I was preaching one on Sunday morning and there was a bloke in the back seat and I was about 5 minutes into my message, launching into all sorts of stuff, and all of a sudden this bloke shouted out from the back row, "Prove it!" I thought, oh, somebody's awake. Somebody's listening. And so what I did, I took all of this guy's statements and I wrote back to him and said, hey, we're alive and well, let's get into it, let's have a debate, let's get back into this business that says, you know what, just because you've slandered or slagged at Christianity, don't think we're just going to roll over and say, tickle my tummy because I've had enough. And you know, there were three things that this guy, and I loved him for it, challenged me on. And the first one is this, is that Christians have no right to proselytise. You know what proselytise means? They have no right to try and reach out and see other people become Christians. They've got no right to reach out and try and draw people into the kingdom of God. That's proselytising. And I wrote back to him and said, isn't it funny that Richard Dawkins, as an atheist, is probably the most evangelical proselytiser on the planet today, and he's an atheist. By the way, evangelical simply means you're doing it with evangelical fervour. I said, why aren't we critical of him? In fact, he's written a book called The God Delusion. I've not written a book called The Richard Dawkins Delusion. Do you understand that? You see, here's the problem we've got. You know, whenever you are the defendant in an argument, you know that you always look guilty. It's hard to be a defendant And so when you get the Richard Attenborough, the Richard Dawkins and all these people, your Bishop Spongs, and they get stuck into Christianity, it's very hard to defend them because we look like we're oversensitive and we're worried about criticism and we've got to go to these great lengths just to prove that we believe what we... Do you know what I say to this bloke? You are just as responsible to give proof for your non-belief as I am to give proof for my belief. Why don't we ask for that? Why don't we just sit back and say, man, I've got this unbelievable task of trying to prove to the world that I believe this, instead of saying, how does your unbelief stack up? You know, all I've ever asked is that it doesn't matter whether it's a New Age spiritualist or a Christian or an atheist or a homosexual lobbyist. I simply ask that we all are subjected to the same level of critique and accountability in the things that we do and say. That's why you can have Mardi Gras going down Oxford Street about 5 weeks ago and they can have an effigy of Jesus on the cross and nobody is offended. And you know what? The church is not even going to say it's a disgrace. I tell you this, if they had had some kind of slandering of Aboriginal Dreamtime, they would have lost the respect of just about every Australian in this land today. And if they had an effigy of Muhammad up there, they'd now be facing a jihad. They'd all be hiding in the basements and dungeons of their houses, waiting for it to be blown up. Trust me. But you can have an effigy of Jesus and nobody's offended. And I say, be accountable for that, if you're going to do it. The second thing this bloke raised to me is that religion is the cause of all conflict. It's a bit of an old argument. Do you know, I have no problem with this truth that religion has been associated with conflict over the centuries. But it's a shallow understanding of both history and humanity to believe that religion is the primary cause. That is nonsense. Don't let anybody tell you that. There is a fundamental problem of humanity with things like greed and selfishness and hypocrisy that supersedes any religious belief. And unfortunately, religion has been the obvious vehicle for people to predicate their lust for power. And so the whole thought that if you got rid of religion, somehow you get rid of human conflict is completely nonsense. In fact, you only have to look at the atrocities perpetuated by atheistic regimes like Stalin in Russia and Pol Pot in Cambodia to get ample evidence. The third thing, the last thing I mentioned, is that this thought of Christianity has no right to claim truth. Folks, we need to get on top of this. Do you know, everywhere I get the opportunity these days, I want to say this. Do you believe something? And for goodness sake, believe it. Who ever heard of somebody saying, yes, I believe that's true, but I won't get too serious about it? I wrote back to this guy and said to him, you know what, of course I believe it's true, and of course I'm going to do something with it, because it would be sheer nonsense for me to say I believe that's true and not go and do something with it. I mean, even Coca-Cola does that. Do you see those full-page ads in the paper about a week ago? Anybody? I think you've all just comatose out. Do you know what? They put on these adverts on telly with Kerry Armstrong over the last 6 months to say that Coca-Cola does not make children fat, does not rot their teeth, and is not packed with large amounts of caffeine. Which planet are they on? And the ACCC, is that it? Or the AACCC? ACCC were not fooled by that, and they said you will publish full-page articles to tell people they are sheer, bold-faced lies. But I'll tell you this, Coke had no qualms in trying to tell us that that was the truth. What is truth? You know, I need to start to wrap this up, but here's Pilate asking this question about truth. And Pilate is saying to the Jews and to Jesus, do you know what? As the Roman governor, I have power over life and death. And I don't know about you, but can you see the genius of God here? Because you know what God did? God said, you know what? Here's Rome with all of its power. And the ultimate sense of that power is the cross. You defy Rome and you finish up on the cross. So what does God do? God says, I will make that very thing the ultimate display of my grace. You know, the very worst that the Romans could do is to say, if you don't submit to my authority, you will die. God says, you know what? While you are not submitting to my authority, you can live.